Hello and welcome to the next Buddhism Beliefs and Teachings lesson. Today we are going to be looking at the concepts of karma, rebirth, and the three poisons. So to start us off then, we need to first know exactly what it is we are going to try and do in this lesson. So first of all, we are going to try to explain what we mean by both karma and the concept of rebirth and the cycle of samsara. We're going to describe what those realms of samsara are, what their pros and what their cons are of each different realm. We're going to understand how the three poisons can affect our existence within samsara, as well as knowing then how the Eightfold Path can help us avoid those three poisons. Obviously, at the end of this, then, we are going to try and apply this to a GCSE exam-style 12-mark question with a 4-mark question midway through the lesson as well. You're going to need to make sure you have a pen and paper at the ready. So to start off, then, we need to understand what their view is on life and how we work as individuals. Now, they believe that all our actions that we have consequences, both good and bad. This is what we refer to as karma within Buddhism. Now, you'll hear me refer to this concept of samsara, and this is the idea that life exists within a cycle. And this is that we are born, and then we will die, and then we'll be reborn in a new life. Now, it is not a different soul each time. It is one soul that is moving from body to body to body. This just sort of goes to show that our physical form is not a permanent existence. Now, karma can impact your rebirth. If you get good karma, your rebirth will be more positive. If you get a negative karma and bad karma, you're going to get a more negative and bad rebirth. So, for example, you can be born as a human, which, as we'll talk about in just a minute, is arguably the most important form to be born as. However, if you receive a lot of bad karma, you could be reborn as something like a frog, where your existence isn't going to be as luxurious, and you're going to have to learn the lessons from that bad karma in that life. However, if you do everything right and through a few different sort of rebirths where you can get some positive actions, it might be that one day you can be reborn as a human. Now, the important thing to recognize, though, is that karma isn't an instant thing. If you receive bad karma, this might not be impacting you until several lifetimes down the line. It's not something that's guaranteed to impact your next life. It's just as and whenever it is that you need to learn the lessons that that bad karma is going to teach you. So you've got different lessons you need to learn throughout your life, and therefore karma is going to impact you when it needs to, not just because it has to happen straight away. Now, some quotations for you to write down here. This first one here from the Dhammapada. It basically just talks about how everything that you do, it doesn't matter how big or how small it is, actions will have consequences. So you can't hide from it. No matter where you go, you cannot hide from those consequences of your actions. You just have to recognize that it's going to impact you. You also have this then, that we are all, whatever we are in our mind. Now, if we have a positive mind and we can do positive things in our world, that can give us good karma. And this can then help us make sure that we then get a positive rebirth. So any life that you live, if you have that positive mind, you'll have a positive rebirth. However, if you go into the world and you're very angry and you're hateful and you have that very negative mind, that is what you're going to be. You're going to exist in a world where that is the case. So it just goes to show how karma can start to impact your existence. And then we have this quotation here which supports this idea of the cycle of samsara. And basically says to anyone who doesn't know the correct way to live your life and doesn't live in accordance with that, you're effectively a fool. You're going to be stuck in this cycle of life, death, and rebirth, this constant suffering that we looked at in the previous lesson in the Four Noble Truths. That idea of dukkha, that all life is suffering. You can escape that, though, if you follow that true path. So understanding what samsara is, we need to know what the 6 different realms are and what their pros and cons are. The first one is the God realm. Now, this sounds like an amazing place to be because it's where you are this powerful being, you're living in luxury, you've got everything that you could ever want. However, the way I try to describe this is imagine if you had a choice that being at school or hanging out with your friends outside of school doing something you enjoy? For a lot of people, they're probably going to choose hanging out with their friends because it's that luxury sort of time that you get to have where you can do fun things and enjoy yourself. However, the argument from a Buddhist perspective is that at school you can learn more information, you can learn truth. And that is what you should try to do. So in the God realm, it's a problematic place to be because you're not going to want to try and learn those lessons. You're going to be too busy enjoying the luxury around you. The next one is a demigod realm, which again sounds pretty good, but it has a lot of problems. Now, if you look throughout mythologies, you'll see that demigods have a tendency to be a little bit egotistical, and therefore when they see a different demigod or a different being that is sort of threatening their power, they get extremely jealous, and they're constantly at conflict with each other, trying to gain that sort of superior power. So because there is this care of self, and how important that you are, and this therefore the creation of the power struggles, it means you're still attached to who you are as an individual, and that becomes a problem because it's just going to cause you to suffer. So it still is not a great life to be in. Now, the human realm gives you the best chance of reaching enlightenment. It has that perfect sort of balance of suffering and luxury that motivates you to wants you to help get to that point of having ultimate knowledge where you can reach enlightenment and escape from that cycle of samsara. You can't get that kind of motivation and that conscious choice in a different existence. You then have the animal realm, and the problem that the animal realm brings is that A, you are living purely off of instinct, and therefore you are going to be ignorant to what life is trying to tell you in particular moments when things occur in your existence. So depending on the animal you're reborn as, your level of sentience is going to be slightly different. A worm isn't exactly going to have the same level of family care and awareness as something, say, like a dolphin. So the animal that you're born in does also matter, but for the most part, you are going to be ignorant to the general rules of life. You're not going to be something that is going to be, you're not going to be aware of it, and therefore you can't learn from it. You then have the hungry ghost realm, which is a place where effectively, no matter how much you eat, it will never satisfy that craving that you have, leaving you in a strong amount of pain. Now, this goes to show that you are extremely greedy and you are needing to learn from that greed. So this is where we start to talk about, well, if you did something bad a few lifetimes ago and it was a greedy decision that you make and you need to learn why greed is bad, it might be that that lesson is outweighed by a more important lesson that they need to learn in the next life. And then this lesson comes along a future life. That's kind of how karma works. It's just as and when the need is appropriate. Now, the hell realm is the final realm of existence, and this is just a place filled with suffering and is not something that you ever want to go to, and you must have lived a really awful life where you have been filled with anger and hatred. Maybe you have even gone as far as murder, for example. Someone who has done those sorts of actions is likely to end up in the hell realm. Now, this image here is something that's commonly used to explain the wheel of samsara and how it works. What you'll notice is that in each of the corners there is a man standing, and that there is the Buddha. Now, as you go round the wheel, the Buddha is still there in all of the images, and that goes to show that you need to have lived in all parts of existence and able to reach the fact that the Buddha then managed to escape that samsara. But you've got to first live in all 6 realms at some point to have truly learnt every lesson that you could possibly learn. So let's do a quick knowledge check. Here is 3 definitions and 3 sort of ideas that I need you to write down for me. I'm going to reveal the answers in just a moment. So pause the video here. I'll be showing the answers in 3, 2, and 1. So here are the answers. Karma is the idea that all of your intentional actions, they will have some level of consequence, whether that be good or bad. You've got the idea of samsara, which is that idea of life, earth, and rebirth, that your soul is a permanent part of you, but your body is not. So as your soul moves, it will move from one life to another to another. And then find the 6 realms. You've got the God realm, the demigod realm, the human realm, the animal realm, the hungry ghost realm, and the hell realm. Give yourself a mark out of 3. Hopefully, you've managed to get 100%. So if we were to apply this then to a GCSE question, for those 4-mark questions, it's a really straightforward process if you use the wording of the question to help you write your answer. This is a really useful tool if you're someone who really struggles when it comes to starting your answer. So the first thing we've got here is, one Buddhist belief by the cycle of samsara is that your rebirth is controlled by your karma. It's a really simple sentence using that question as my sentence starter. Once we've done that, that gives us 1 mark. We then need to explain it. So this means that as soon as you say this, means that you're instantly starting to give that extra bit of information, which is exactly what you need to do in these explain questions. It doesn't have to be huge amounts of detail, but just enough to show you have an understanding of how it works. So this means that if you do good actions, you will have a better rebirth. And this is true, so that would get you the first 2 marks. However, the question does ask you to explain 2 Buddhist beliefs. So far, we've only done 1. So we again go, another Buddhist belief about the cycle of samsara is the human realm is the best realm. And therefore, we need to start off our sentence with a this. This is because it allows you to follow the Buddha's teachings and reach enlightenment. This goes to show how simple a 4-mark question can be if you break it down into sentence by sentence. 1 mark for each sentence. Your point, and then you explain. Your point, and then you explain. 4 sentences, 4 marks. Now, the thing that can keep us stuck in the cycle of samsara, you would have seen it in the center image of the wheel of samsara, this idea here of the pig, the rooster, and the snake. And they are all biting each other's tails, showing how they keep you trapped in that cycle of samsara. Now, the 3 poisons, you have the rooster, which represents the concept of greed. You have the snake, which represents the idea of hatred. And the pig, which represents the idea of ignorance. Now, the reason this keeps you stuck in the wheel of samsara is because the rooster, this idea of greed, means that you have a desire for physical things. If you are greedy, you want stuff. And if you want stuff, it means you are attached to things. Now, as we know, one of the main Buddhist beliefs is that attachments cause suffering. That idea of samudaya from those 4 noble truths. Now, the snake, it represents hatred. Now, an easy way to remember this is that a lot of people hate snakes. But this idea of hatred, when you hate something, it means you have an active attachment to it. Now, this can be confusing because it goes, well, I don't want to hate people, but I just do sometimes. The problem is that if you hate someone, you are constantly allowing them to take up space in your mind, meaning that somewhere down the line, you actually care about this situation. So Buddhists suggest that rather than hating people, you need to let them go, because otherwise you are going to remain attached on them and they will stay in your mind, and it's going to do nothing but cloud your thoughts, making you do worse actions. And then finally, you have this idea of ignorance and the pig. An easy way to remember this is pignorance. Now, the idea of ignorance is a problem for Buddhists because, well, you can't reach enlightenment unless you know the truth. Now, ignorance is this idea of not having information, not being aware of something. So if you go about your life ignoring everything around you, ignoring the life lessons that you need to be learning, you're never going to learn enough in order to reach that state of enlightenment and go to nirvana. Now, how does this link then to karma? As we've just said, greed, you can get negative karma from that. Hatred, you're going to get negative karma from that. Now, ignorance, you would argue that this can be in some life forms, depending on where you're born in samsara, a bit of a problem where you could end up with some bad karma. However, the amount of bad karma is something that would be questioned because it's down to your intentional actions. Sometimes you can't help being ignorant if you are not in a life form that allows you to understand that. So it might be that that is just a form of a punishment, a removal of that bad karma if you're born in a life form where you're really that incapable of actually doing anything to benefit yourself. Some quotations then that can be useful for you. Here we see how craving can actually cause you to have that fear and this negative karma that can come with that. When you have a desire for something, it's all well and good, but when you then can't get that thing, it does cause that idea of fear. Now, for many people, they would say their addictions, their cravings, when they can't get access to those things, it causes them to do bad things that can allow them to receive their craving. Now, obviously, this is going to create a lot of bad karma, and this can be shown here in this quote from the Dhammapada. Now, next we see this concept of the hatred. It doesn't cease by causing more hate, but only if you love. And if you can love something, even if you hated it before, it means you no longer allow them to have that negative space in your mind. You are freeing yourself from that negativity by just choosing to walk away from it. Now, this obviously is something that is much easier said than done, which is why many Buddhists who really want to push themselves and try to reach enlightenment, they will go off to monasteries where they are surrounded by other individuals who are very much like-minded. Because sometimes when trying to live in day-to-day society, this hatred is something that you can't always necessarily get away from. And finally then, this idea of the ignorant man being an enemy to himself, as he is to others. By being ignorant and ignoring the teachings of the Buddha, you're only going to keep yourself suffering. You're only going to keep yourself in this place of pain and suffering, in this constant rebirth in the wheel of samsara. Now, also being ignorant can impact other people. If you go about as a man and you decide you're going to go and kill animals, for example, for Buddhists, this is a real problem, because those are other beings that are trying to live through their karmic cycle. They're trying to live out their bad karma, or maybe learn some lessons for a future life. You're interrupting that by taking that life. So not only can you be damaging to yourself, but you can also be damaging to others that might be around you. Now, the way to try and avoid then those three poisons is by living in accordance to the Eightfold Path. Now, this actually links to the main symbol of Buddhism, that Dharma Chakra wheel, which represents this concept of the Eightfold Path. It's a list of 8 things that you need to do in order to reach enlightenment. Now, this pathway that you need to follow is something that is supposed to lead to that end of suffering. So it's a suggestion from the Buddha to say, if you live accordance to these rules, you are going to be able to escape from suffering. So here are those 8 rules. This idea that you need to have right view and right intention. So your thoughts need to be correct. You need to be thinking about doing good things, as well as only listening and searching for the truth, not allowing lies into your mind. So if your friend tells you something and you know it's not true, you need to question it and you need to say, sorry, no, this isn't true. And you need to give the truth in all situations. You also need to make sure that you are speaking and acting correctly in accordance to being most loving to the people around you. Right livelihood, this idea that your work needs to be something that is benefiting others rather than damaging others. So if your job is something like a scam artist where you're stealing money from people, that isn't right livelihood. But if you're something like a doctor where you're saving people, that could be considered more like right livelihood. You need to make sure that you're putting the right effort into the practices that you have. This idea that you need to ensure that every Buddhist practice you're doing, you are putting 100% of yourself into it, because only by doing so can you actually do all the things you need to do to reach enlightenment. Right concentration. You have to make sure that you are actively trying to get into that meditative state and making sure that you're concentrating on the right things, finding that truth, finding that peace, finding that sort of way that you need to live your life. And then finally, right mindfulness, making sure that you actually practice that meditation. You actually go into those moments of meditation and allow yourself to be in that mind space of what is true. Now, finally, we get on to this 12-mark question. Now, you will have these types of questions across many different exam boards, as well as some exam boards will have a 15-mark question. The structure is very, very similar, and my recommendation will always be the same. Start with your quotations first. It's really important that you make sure that you follow these quotations, because if you think of a point, that's all well and good, but if you can't find evidence to back it up, that can then become a real struggle and it can waste time in the exam. If you have some solid quotations that you can remember, you can then pull points out of those quotations. That way you know that everything you're writing about, you can back up with evidence. So we see here on the agree side that quotation about the Eightfold Path leading to the end of suffering. You can say, therefore, that it must be the most effective way to break free from samsara, because it's literally saying it's the pathway that leads to the end of it all, leads to the end of samsara and reaching enlightenment. You can talk about the fact that in sort of right mindfulness, right intention, and right view, you can link that in then to this quotation of all that we are as a result of what we thought. So if you have the right thoughts and right things, you'll be in the right places. You will be getting to the right sort of areas where you can start to consider reaching enlightenment. And then we have this idea then of the long cycle of birth and death, or to the fool who does not know the true path, that true path being the Eightfold Path. If you do not know the true path of the Eightfold Path, you're never going to escape samsara. And then finally, in the disagree side, you have this idea of the three poisons being something that if you can avoid those three poisons, that you can escape from samsara. That's the best way. However, what I would argue in this case is a question like this, the stronger side is probably going to be in agreement with it, because you could argue that actually in avoiding the three poisons, you're actually following the Eightfold Path. Now, if you can use that as valuation, let's say at the end of your disagree paragraph, you just write a sentence at the end saying, this is a weak argument, however, because if you are avoiding the three poisons, you're actively following the Eightfold Path. So that would show great awareness of the question and what it is that it's actually asking, as well as your understanding of Buddhist beliefs. If you can do that, that's how you get those 12 out of 12 marks. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. I hope this lesson has been helpful, and I will see you in the next one.